Welcome to Silicon Wafers episode 23. And in this one, we're going to be looking at how the Russian propagandists on state TV are losing their minds over Ukraine's Kursk incursion. Ukraine's offensive in the Kursk region seems to have triggered a meltdown amongst Russia's propagandists and the talking heads on state TV. Despite the usual exhortations to violence and denigrations of Ukraine, their ire this week seems to have turned on their own leaders in the wake of Ukraine's success in grabbing and holding Russian territory in the Kursk Oblast, and now also potentially in Belgorod and Bryansk. Phrases which are usually heard by the most extreme liberal opposition commentators, such as Michael Naki, who are vocally supportive of Ukraine and their victory, are now being screamed at viewers of the main Russian state TV networks. And some of the stuff they are saying is pretty wild. The kind of stuff that usually causes bankers to fall out of windows in Moscow or their private jets to experience mechanical trouble, as Prigozhin discovered. They're saying that the SVO, the special military operation, has run out of strength, that Russian victory is not guaranteed at all, and most shocking of all, that Russia's military and civil leaders have lost control of everything, including the territories lost by Russia to Ukraine, may not be returning to the motherland anytime soon. Some have even expressed grudging praise for Ukraine's military prowess. Before we dive into the detail, I must emphasize what a seismic shock this has been for the propagandists, and we must assume by extension the Russian leadership. It's a mark of how seriously Putin takes the incursions that he's tried to avoid all mention of them. At the same time, he's taken the militarily catastrophic decision to appoint the FSB to lead the counter operation. In this episode, I'll share some speeches by the panicking propagandists, which are indicative of the chaos and their extraordinary statements. We must note, of course, that they are not critical of the idea of the war and would rapidly embrace any victory, no matter how minor. No, they are critical of the leaders precisely because the war is not being prosecuted in a brutal enough manner or showing success. We'll start with a regular guest on Channel 1, Shiryugina, who is apparently a military expert. His outburst in criticizing the war is harsher and more fervent than most of the cautious utterances of the so-called liberal Russian oppositionists. He castigates the Russian army for fighting poorly and constantly lying. Remember, a member of the public saying something like this would land themselves 10 years in a Siberian penal colony. A war is a war, he said. If you decide to fight, then fight. If you decide to surrender, then surrender. We come to the situation that is unfolding today. The enemy is on our territory. The enemy has been on our territory for 2 weeks already. We were made a promise they would be dealt with in 3 days, but we still haven't heard who is to blame for this happening. After any military operation, especially if it's unsuccessful, there follows a debriefing when they find out why, how, and who is to blame, who took charge of the troops, who didn't make a particular decision, who ignored the intelligence information, and so on. This, of course, all takes place among a narrow circle of people. But the country, after 2 weeks, should at least see one accurate and complete map showing the territory that we've lost so far. The point is that our soldiers will have to fight to get this back, paying with their blood. But still, we don't have any kind of normal map anywhere. Bloggers are drawing up sketches of the terrain, but excuse me, these are just bloggers. We are seriously losing the information war because we kept saying, okay, somehow, somewhere, UAV debris fell out of the sky and blew up an entire oil depot. Excuse me, we don't live in a vacuum. The internet is clogged with videos and comments. It's clogged with enemy information. Our fellow citizens leave our information sources when they are fed endless lies and they switch to the enemy's information. This is not some kind of garden for them. They switch the channel, stop reading our stuff, and go to some rubbish elsewhere. Those who are responsible for this must understand that they are letting victory slip away. We don't have Smersh today, and in fact are endlessly distracted by stories like the banning of gadgets at the front and the drunken soldiers complaining from the front lines. Sorry, but this drunken soldier at the front should have been put into some kind of illegal pit or taken to the Rostov military court. Excuse me, but for half of those people at the front, it's a vacation. You understand? We're at war, but are fighting with one hand tied behind our backs, so to speak. And on the other hand, the boss has given us a pillow to fight with instead of a boxing glove. We need that second hand to be untied. Because if you're going to walk, then walk. If you're going to shoot, then shoot. If you're going to go to war, then unpleasant as it may be, go to war properly. Let's fight and stop simply chewing on our own snot. War is mathematics mixed with chess. We need to understand that there are no miracles in war. Everything that happens is down to cause and effect. I understand the Ukrainian command is completely logical. They're acting according to military logic. I can see why they destroy bridges to try and force us out, to cut us off. So I don't understand why we're not demolishing the entire series of dams along the river Dnieper. Such a catastrophe would have the Ukrainians occupied for several weeks at least. Ukrainian logistics would be turned to dust, scorched. I don't care who scolds us for that. I want to say at least one time that I attended the funeral of a Russian soldier who was given all the kit he needed in time, had all the cover he required, and in short, was given everything he needed to fight properly. Because these Ukrainian reserves will arrive on our territory. They will cross these bridges, you understand, and our troops will not have the time to dig trenches even. We shouldn't think like humanists. We should not think about our opponents. Let their leadership think about them. We must think about our own. You know, people say, how can we take out the Ukrainians' energy system? How can we do such a thing? The people who live there will freeze. Well, what will the 125,000 evacuated residents of Kursk do? And that's not the final total. Many more will likely join them. You understand, war has come to our home. We must destroy their power networks and generators, and not the nuclear plants, but all the others, the 750 kilowatt stations, all of them. After Ukraine invaded 2 weeks ago, it seems we still don't know who to blame, why it happened, and why the attack happened on this scale, and whether it can happen again. And instead of acting, we play all these pointless games. We give the enemy the impression that they have impunity. Just listen to what Ukrainians say. Mikhail Podolyak said 3 days ago, "What do you see in Kursk? Why are you afraid of the Russians? We've already violated all of their red lines, whatever those may have been, and we are now on their territory." So all this is being said on state Russian TV on Channel 1, which is one of the main channels. It's not TV Rain. It's not one of the opposition stations that fled the country and now operate in countries like Estonia. These are commentators based in Moscow talking on state TV itself. It's worth taking a moment to comment on this outburst by the propagandist. He's not some opposition politician and didn't just come on the channel by accident. Nothing happens by accident there, and no one is allowed on unless they and their views are approved in some way in advance. That's what makes this stuff even more remarkable. But he's not against the war. In fact, he is in favor of an intensification of the violence. The reason, of course, is the Kursk incursion and the impossibility of hushing it up any longer. Most Russians are now aware of it and the scale of the incursion and the attack by Ukrainian forces. This is a kind of feedback loop they're creating to those in power. These propagandists are screaming out to get a grip, tackle Ukraine with a firm hand. But this shows that the house of cards created by the SVO, and indeed the entire Putin vertical regime, is built on. Propagandists are demanding an end to lies on a tactical and military level. But the entire system is built on lies. The pointless war is built on lies and delusions. Putin's regime is built on lies. Elections and all the trappings and institutions of the state are one enormous pack of lies. The vertical of power can only function because of the lies that grease its mechanisms. Violence and intimidation fuel the machine. Lies and privilege grease the wheels. So if officials and people were to stop telling lies in one sphere, then the entire edifice of the system would collapse. Strand by strand, it would all unravel, leaving nothing remaining in its place. But of course, this will never happen. These propagandists themselves lie. They lie. We know they lie. They know. We know they lie. And so goes the old Soviet joke. And this has never been truer than it is in modern Russia. And these lies are deadlier than ever to the participants in them. The guest expert in Solovyov's studio is not doing much better than this. His permanent expert talking head is on very dodgy ground with the following statement. There are more and more questions about the state, and there may even be political upheavals ahead. I tell you this, our government this spring had a colossal credit in terms of public trust, but it would be a very big mistake to think that this credit of trust is inexhaustible, let alone that it is eternal. If this trust is used up, called into question, as it has been for the last month, no, the last 2.5 months even, then I'm afraid that down the road we can expect very big political problems for the whole country. Our enemy is not fighting to live, but fighting to the death. They are fighting for their very survival. But on our side, we have too many people in the political elite and surrounding it whose main concern is to return to February the 21st, 2022. Get back to that point without making any slips of the tongue, back to the moment of Russia's recognition of the Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics as independent states. Of course, they want to keep Crimea. Many of them have brought themselves nice places there, but also too many of them want to turn everything back to how it was, return to their castles in France, their mansions in London, the penthouse in New York, and the luxury villa in Dubai. Now you can't even safely go there anymore. Those in the West have studied us. They know everything about everyone. But have we really studied them? Do our people understand the logic with which the West, guiding the hands of Kiev, is waging military operations against us? Our boss's answer is yes, but something tells me that I won't believe them. I'm a loyal person. I want to believe in our state. But even I'm starting to distrust our government, despite my background at a really fundamental level. But what do people in Moscow, St. Petersburg, the Kazan metro think? Places that our officials never go down to. That is an interesting question from the propagandist. Against this unfolding situation and the obvious failures of the second strongest army of the world, on the territory of Kursk, Russian territory, State Duma Deputy Vladimir Lipyoshkin attacked forcefully the commanders of the Russian forces. He compared the soldiers to chickens with microscopic brains. They cackle in their enclosures and are eaten by Ukrainian foxes. Why has there not been created a military district, a special military district covering at least 3 regions, including Belgorod, Kursk, and Bryansk, to establish a system, a unified management system, which does not exist today? These are the feelings that are created in me by seeing the events in August. That's why the chickens are running around, flapping their wings due to their microscopic brains. They're not capable of fighting back collectively. In this way, the cunning Ukrainian foxes eat them little by little. Well, there are a lot of questions like that in relation to Russian leadership. The Ukrainian offensive in the Kursk region has already hit Russia very hard in terms of territories captured, but also image and reputation. All the commentators ask the question why Russia doesn't respond to this. Why don't we respond? Why are the authorities apparently inactive? Red lines may not exist anymore. Those Ukrainians can go anywhere and do anything they want. Well, we need to have a bit of a reality check here and again analyze what the propagandist, what the speaker is saying. The criticism of Russian forces, no matter how harsh, always leads back to the same call for more war and more violence. This is like a machine that is fundamentally broken. To every mistake, to every failure, the answer propagandists are calling for is to double down on the same thing that led to that failure, the same brutal and pointless acts which will inevitably lead to more failure. They're not advocating for a systemic change to Russia and its leadership, but are stuck on an infinite escalation loop which is doomed to catastrophic failure. The Ukrainian soldiers in Kursk, who have made such success of the offensive, are themselves victims of Russian violence and genocide. Some have seen their cities erased and their own families killed. They've been fighting Russian aggression for 2.5 years of full-scale war. Some of them have been fighting a lot longer than that, going back to 2014. Resisting Russia, which has killed their relatives and friends, destroyed their cities, kidnapped children, and erased infrastructure and culture. And finally, one more. NTV is also beginning to realize that Russia's constant lies are not helping them to win the war. This propagandist says, we've been told constantly that the Ukrainian army is weak and has only months to fight. We've been told with every election of a new government in various countries that they will stop supporting Ukraine or that Ukrainian soldiers will simply run out. We've heard this story many, many times over, but it is obvious that they are unfortunately not in agony, but are advancing. The real situation on the front is also not so optimistic. Some of the Russian propagandists have gone even further and are suggesting now wiping the Kursk region off the face of the earth. Not Ukrainian territory anymore, because they've been calling for this to happen over the last couple of years, but they're calling for their own lands to be turned to ash and waste. And this in order to check the Ukrainians' advance and leave them nothing worth taking. This propagandist from the studio of Solovyov makes the case for carpet bombing every standing structure in the Kursk region, every bridge, every tree, every house. It would take out everything Russia has there, but so she argues also destroys the occupying Ukrainian forces. The sheer inhumanity and plain idiocy of some of these paid lackeys, these venomous talking heads on state TV in Russia, is just incredible. Here's a suggestion to top out this episode for the genius Russian propagandists. Why don't they bomb all their own cities to deny the shelter and spoils to Ukraine? It would save time and they could leave Ukraine alone. The first propagandist we featured in this segment says ominously that Putin's elections that took place in this spring, when he was granted an 88% level of support, he hints that it was given, not earned. And he further says, Putin has not justified this credit of trust placed in him. Such statements were inconceivable just a few months ago, and it creates a kind of distant echo from that other individual who just over a year ago started talking truth to power. Granted, Prigozhin went far further than they're going. He insulted Putin and questioned the very strategy of going to war, the very point of the SVO. He was not a propagandist. And of course, there is a fundamental difference between Prigozhin and these talking heads. Prigozhin was a gangster and a warlord. He mixed words with actions and earned his fortune through violence, extreme violence, theft, and blood. But he clearly had lost some faith in the state, faith in the military, and indeed in Vladimir Putin. He was vile, he was a criminal, but his words echoed with a harsh truth that even the liberal opposition can barely muster. He was an unholy fool, but perhaps more people are coming round to his point of view.